Okay, so think about this for a second. A single breath. Super simple, right? Well, not exactly. That one breath kicks off this incredible journey through one of the most masterfully engineered systems in your entire body. So in this explainer, we're going to follow that single breath from the moment it enters your body all the way down to your cells.
So here's the game plan. We'll start with what this system actually does. It's way more than just breathing. Then we'll literally follow the air down its path. We're going to pinpoint where the magic happens, the gas exchange. Then we'll look at the mechanics, the engine behind it all. And finally, we'll dive into the body's autopilot that runs the whole thing without you even thinking about it.
All right, let's kick things off. Section 1. We all know, it's obvious, we need to breathe to live. But why? What's the core problem that breathing is the solution for?
Well, the answer is both super simple and kind of profound. Think of every single cell in your body, all trillions of them, as a tiny little factory. And just like any factory, it needs fuel, which in this case is oxygen, to make energy. But it also produces exhaust, a waste product, which is carbon dioxide. So breathing, it's just the body's brilliant system for getting the fuel in and taking the trash out.
But, calling it just a gas delivery service is really selling it short. This system has a pretty diverse resume. Besides the whole moving air and swapping gases thing, is the reason you can talk. That's thanks to your larynx, your voice box. Oh, and your sense of smell? Yep, that's the respiratory system too. All thanks to these special nerve fibers up in your nose.
Okay, on to our next section. Let's actually follow a breath of air and trace the physical path it takes. It's not just a straight shot. The air gets prepped along the way for where it's headed.
All right, so the trip starts in your nasal cavity. This place is like your own personal air treatment plant. It warms up the air, adds moisture, and filters out junk. From there, the air hits the pharynx, which is basically a crossroads for air and food. And right there, you've got this little flap called the epiglottis. It's like a traffic cop, seriously. It slaps down over your windpipe when you swallow so your lunch doesn't go down the wrong tube. Assuming all goes well, the air then continues down the trachea, the windpipe, which has these cool cartilage rings that keep it from collapsing.
So the air finally gets to the lungs, but here's a fun fact, they're not identical twins. The right lung is actually a bit bigger and has 3 lobes, while the left one only has 2. And why is that? Well, the left lung has to make a little space. It's got this little cutout called the cardiac notch to fit its super important neighbor, the heart.
Once we're inside the lungs, that main windpipe, the trachea, splits into 2 main highways called the primary bronchi. From there, it's like a road map. Those highways branch off into smaller roads, then even smaller ones, and finally into these tiny little side streets called bronchioles. They just keep branching and getting smaller and smaller, heading deeper and deeper into the lungs.
All right, so our little puff of air has made its way down all those shrinking paths, and now it's arrived. This is the end of the line, the place where the real magic happens.
Now, this is a really important distinction to make. The lungs basically have 2 different zones. The whole pathway we just talked about, the trachea, the bronchi, that's called the conducting zone. You can think of it as just the pipes. No gas exchange is happening there at all. That's why it's sometimes called anatomical dead space. The real action, the important stuff, that all goes down in the respiratory zone.
And the absolute superstars of the respiratory zone are the alveoli. Picture these millions of tiny little air sacs, kind of like bunches of grapes, at the very end of the line. And their design is just genius. Get this, if you could somehow flatten out all these tiny sacs from your lungs, they would cover an entire tennis court. That massive surface area, plus the fact that they're wrapped in tiny blood vessels, makes them insanely efficient at what they do.
Yeah, the quote here really says it all. After that whole long trip, this is it. This is the spot. It's the critical handoff point where oxygen finally jumps into your blood to go fuel your body, and all that carbon dioxide waste gets kicked out. Okay, so we've got the path, and we've got the destination. But what's actually moving the air? How does it get in and out? Let's pull back the curtain and look at the engine room, the muscles and pressure changes that power this whole thing.
So breathing is basically a 2-part process. You've got inspiration, that's breathing in, and that's an active process. It takes muscle work. But then you have expiration, breathing out. And what's wild is that when you're just chilling, breathing out is totally passive. It literally happens just by your muscles relaxing. No work involved.
So let's break down inhaling. How does it work? Well, first, your diaphragm. That's a big, dome-shaped muscle under your lungs. It contracts and flattens out.
At the exact same time, the little muscles between your ribs pull your whole rib cage up and out. All of this makes the space in your chest bigger, which creates a low-pressure zone. And what does air do? It rushes in to fill that vacuum. Simple physics.
And exhaling? It's pretty much the exact opposite, but way easier. Those muscles just relax, the diaphragm goes back to its dome shape, the rib cage settles back down, and that shrinks the space in your chest. This puts the squeeze on your lungs, raises the pressure inside, and boom, the air gets pushed right out. Totally effortless.
Of course, there's always an exception to the rule, right? If you're working out really hard, or you have to cough, or you're blowing out candles on a cake, then suddenly breathing out does become an active process. That's when your abs get in on the action, contracting to help push that air out faster and with more force.
Okay, we've covered the parts and we've covered how they move. But who's the director of this whole show? What's controlling everything? That brings us to our last section. And honestly, it might be the most incredible part of all. The body's built-in autopilot. I mean, just think about it for a second. You're not sitting there right now thinking, okay, time to breathe in. Now, time to breathe out. No way. It just happens, right? That's because your brain and your nervous system are running the whole complex operation in the background for you, completely on autopilot. So how does your brain know to speed things up or slow them down? Well, here's the surprising part. The main trigger isn't a lack of oxygen, it's the amount of carbon dioxide. See, when CO2 builds up in your blood, say when you're exercising, it makes your blood a tiny bit more acidic. Your brain has these little sensors that pick up on that pH change instantly. And they send a message, hey, breathe faster, breathe deeper. We got to get this extra CO2 out of here and get things back to normal. This quote really hits on a point that trips a lot of people up. We all tend to think we breathe because we're running low on oxygen. But really, the main reason, the primary driver, is the need to get rid of that carbon dioxide buildup. Your body is just constantly, automatically fine-tuning your breathing to keep its internal chemistry perfectly balanced. And you know, when that delicate balance gets thrown off, that's when you run into trouble. If you're not breathing enough, that's called hypoventilation, you get a dangerous buildup of CO2. But you can go the other way too. Breathing too much, hyperventilation, gets rid of too much CO2, and that causes its own whole different set of problems. It's just this amazing feedback loop, this incredible control system that's always making tiny adjustments without you ever having to think about it. And that leads to a pretty fascinating question, right? What happens when that finely tuned autopilot gets messed up for some reason? How does the body try to fix it? So when you put it all together, from just a simple breath of air, to this complex pathway that cleans it, to a microscopic gas exchange happening millions of times a second, all of it powered by this elegant engine of muscles and controlled by a super smart chemical autopilot, it's pretty hard to argue. The respiratory system is, without a doubt, a masterpiece of biological engineering.